So now I'm back with episode 3, which is a hat trick, which is a dart thing. I prefer dart over pool as far as my bar games go, but I don't drink anymore. I didn't go to bars that much anyways, and I was never that good at darts. So what I'd like to talk about today is the nature of fiction in interactive media, which is a really pretentious way of saying stories in video games in relation to nonfiction, fiction in books, television, movies, or anything else. And I think that a lot of people that are not as much into pop culture or entertainment don't always super jive with fiction itself. Some people, for example, they'll watch World War II movies and cowboy movies and Vietnam movies and so on and so forth. But then you get into like, oh, well, this is magic, or this is a weird spy movie, or this is science fiction, and they don't always relate so much to that. And so I want to sort of begin my thesis here talking about why fiction to me is relatable on a human level, emotional level, a personal level, and how that relates to video games and my relationship with video games, which are, relative to movies, probably significantly higher percentage are fiction, because what's a nonfiction video game anyways? You know what I mean? Like you can't really interact with media if it's nonfiction, because then you're going to be doing things that didn't happen. So it's kind of inherently fictional. Well, I guess the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail is, I would say, a nonfiction game. It's educational, historically fairly accurate, at least as accurate as any war movie is or whatever. So why is fiction to me relatable, emotional, and feels as palpable as, a war movie, whatever. And I think that's because great fiction is written in a capacity that includes relatable human elements, and that sort of is what makes great fiction, is that the nature of art includes the flaws that the artist brings to their creations, which you can't go without the flaws, and flaws are human, and the capacity for errors and shortcomings and mistakes is very human. And so when you have a fictional world, it's almost it's a reflection of the artist or the world at the time of its creation. In Lord of the Rings, there's sort of relative, sort of analogous setting points and narrative points that are like vaguely about World War One and World War II. J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings, served in the English military. I don't know exactly what branch he was, probably the army, during World War One, and then his son was in World War II. And I think that J.R.R. Tolkien has said that Sauron isn't Hitler, for example. Like he wasn't intentionally trying to make allusions towards Germany's invasion of Poland or France in the late 30s or whatever. But you can see how the times in the world were informing his perspective and his worldview while he was writing those books, and how you can sort of put yourself in that world, not because we've ever had to fight monsters or ring wraiths or whatever, but because there's evil in the world and they had seen it at that point in time, you know? And so when you get to something that's fictional, it's those sort of qualities that make it real for me. A big love and passion of mine is Star Wars. My significant other had recommended that I flip my camera around in my office so you can see my rebel flag. Not that type of rebel flag. This type of rebel flag. And it's because I'm a huge, passionate Star Wars fan, and I have an Imperial flag as well. They're pretty cool. What can I say? Buy one, hang it up in your room. You'll feel amazing about it. Star Wars is something a lot like video games that I think you kind of, in a way, have to get into when you're young to sort of build that understanding and love and trust in the world, that it takes a lot more effort to get into, like, as an adult. Like, you would have to sort of like try to willingly understand what is going on literally in the plot and like with the characters and sort of the themes and what someone like George Lucas was really going for. And again, the original film came out in 1977, and that is a reflection of George Lucas growing up during the Vietnam War and the first televised war, and having the protests and all the sort of political controversy and intrigue, you know, at the forefront of the news at that time, you know. And then again, with the prequels, you have 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan, you have the invasion of Iraq. And again, with the prequels, it's all about sort of like corporate bureaucracy, you know, overpowered politicians doing things that they maybe shouldn't for their own gain and not necessarily the gain of the public. And already you can see, like, there's a veil of fiction over something that is a real message, and that's the sort of fiction that gets to people. You know, you can't always just have it be a cool idea. Like, Harry Potter's a cool idea. There's a lot of fun things that they do. They run a cart through a wall to get onto a magic train. That's fantastic, clever idea, creative, great. And there's things in Harry Potter too, but I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan, so I'm not, you know, taking down Harry Potter here. I'm just saying, tying it into video games, you have this sort of aspect of, you know, like I said, for Star Wars, I relate that a lot to my family and my relationship with my father and his relationship with me. You know, obviously Luke, Darth Vader, complex, you know, things going on there. And then even in the sequels, which a lot of people hate the sequels. I don't hate the sequels. I have my problems with the sequels, but Luke, as now, you know, an older man, an old man, really, after he's on, you know, the back 9 of his life, and probably the back 4 or 3 of those 9, and he has regrets, you know. And that's the sort of thing that takes it from like, okay, this is, you know, a pulpy, fictional, we're in space, fighting bad guys, shooting laser guns, moving things with our mind, to here's a man that was young at one point in time and conquered the world and was a hero, and now decades later, he is not that anymore. He's failed repeatedly. He's no longer idolized, and in his own eyes, he is not who he portrayed himself as, who he was claimed to be, who he claimed to be at certain points. You know, like if you see, he shows up in The Mandalorian season 2. I don't want to spoil it, but it's, you know, a few years old. Well, I guess I kind of already did. I'm not going to extrapolate any further, but besides right now, I'm going to extrapolate right now. When he shows up, he is in the peak absolute prime of his Jedi knighthood. This is post Return of the Jedi. Luke isn't a true Jedi Knight until he lays down his weapon and he decides not to fight his own father, and that's when he's really a Jedi Knight. Like, he had gotten a lot stronger from the Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. Different lightsaber, got a haircut, whatever. But it wasn't until that moment that it cemented as, like, that's what a Jedi Knight is. That's the ideals. That's the shining beacon of hope. And he continues to be that in The Mandalorian season 2, but he's a lot more powerful. So he's not just like a shining beacon of hope. He's like a trump card. And for a time, he was that guy. He was, you know, evildoers beware, because you're going to be vanquished. And now you see him 25, 30 years later in the sequels. And this is after he tries to restart the Jedi Order, after he tries to, you know, train his nephew, named after his mentor. You know, there's a lot of really heavy pressure, real life pressure to perform and be who you said you were for a long time. And he ultimately fails, you know, and the true lesson that he learns ultimately before he becomes one with the Force, he talks to Yoda, who's now a ghost, about his failure. He is a failure, and he did not do what he said he was going to. And the true lesson from Yoda, even after death, was like, yeah, you're gonna fail. Like you're not, you know, you're not done just because you're an old man. You know, like, you're still gonna learn, and you're still going to be humbled, and that's okay. You know, like, it's okay to forgive yourself, you know, or like with Han Solo and Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, his son. It's like Ben Solo kills his dad, and he's got a lot of complex reasonings as to why he did it, and a lot of them are not good reasons for why he did it. There's probably not very many good reasons to kill your dad. But it was anger, frustration, impulse, insecurity, just loneliness, being lost, all these different things. And it isn't until the end of the sequel trilogy that he has a moment where, I don't know if it's implied to be real, like Han is also a ghost because he's not blue and he didn't have the Force, and becoming one with the Force is a whole thing. Or sorry, Force projecting yourself, Force ghost, whatever. Maybe it's just in his head, or maybe it's not supposed to be like a Force ghost, but it's like Han Solo's essence was passing on like a sentiment through the Force, and then Ben Solo's just doing the imagining him being there, but the sentiment was still coming through somehow, like just the feeling of it. Anyways, I digress. There's his dad, after being murdered by his son, saying like, hey, it's not too late. Like, you're still in there somewhere, and I know it, and I can feel it, and I'm telling you, if you can't feel it anymore, if you don't know where it is, don't give up, because it's there. And getting choked up just thinking about it. Isn't that silly? But those are the kind of things that I relate to as a person. Like, it is hard. I can be hard on myself. It's hard to struggle with failure. you know, and that's the sort of things that have been written about in Marcus Aurelius's Stoicism, whatever it's like, whatever, the Stoicism book. It's like he's the emperor of the known world at that point, kind of, and he still struggles to get out of bed. He still struggles to be the guy, be who he's supposed to be who he says he is. You know, I mean, he's the emperor. He's all powerful, you know, and here's this guy talking about not only his struggles, but his desire to be a good person, to forgive his enemies, and how important it is to him to be able to do that, and to see that sort of reflected in Luke as an old man forgiving himself for his failures, my dad as an old man forgiving himself for his shortcomings, Han Solo as a dad telling his son, who's now an adult, you're like, Ben is still in there, you know, like who you were deep down inside is still in there and is never gonna go away. Like, you can always find that part of you if you really look for it, and when you really need it, it's gonna be there for you to hold on to, and you should trust that and trust in the Force and blah 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 blah. So I'm really cutting deep swaths into my time right now, and I haven't talked about video games, so I'm just gonna do an abrupt transition now and talk about why those poignant moments in fiction in relation to video games can inspire me to go down a rabbit hole looking at all the lore and the stuff in the books about these video game worlds that you spend so much time in. You know, like my previous episode, I talked about Skyrim, and obviously all Bethesda Game Studios games, notably Skyrim, has a lot of lore, a lot of background, a lot of ways where you can immerse yourself into the world and find different levels of storytelling that all sort of convey different ideas of stories that you find in the real world. Because since it's a fully fleshed out world and you can walk around, pick up and read every single book, you can talk to people, you can go on your own adventures, you know, it's like you have your own story going on, you have other people's stories that you are interacting with or being a part of or telling you about, or talking about their past. You have sort of just the actual environmental storytelling of, you know, show don't tell, and you find a skeleton in a cave with a key, and then, you know, there's a monster blocking a door, and you're like, he was trying to get to this door, but he's got the key, and the monster done him in. And that's on top of just like the books. There's literal stories in the world of Elder Scrolls, and those stories are interesting because within the fictional world of the Elder Scrolls, there is also fiction, and then there's also unreliable narrators, and there's also just historical inaccuracies within the world of Elder Scrolls. So it's not, you can't go into any book in Skyrim and be like, oh, this is what really happened in this time in this game because it says so right here in the game. Like, why would the game lie? It's like, well, that's authentic history. You know, it's authentic world building is putting in inaccuracies in the same way that, you know, like I said at the beginning, flaws are part of art, and there's certainly tons of flaws in Skyrim, but these ones are intentional to convey that human aspect of their world, and it's grounding, because now it's not just I'm a magic man shooting fireballs out of my hands, killing dragons in a foreign land, etc. It's now these are people with a past and a story, and there's rivalries and grudges that come from hundreds of years ago, and it's between individuals, it's between races and countries, and these countries have established religions and blah 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 blah. And so when I think about someone that doesn't like fiction and doesn't see the capacity for fiction to transfix you and give you these sort of experiences and feelings that are so much like the ones that I get exploring our own real true history, like I had mentioned in one of the previous videos. I'm really into history. I find it really interesting, provocative. I find it to be so cool that you can find artifacts of real people that were at one point just like you and me. You know, it's not always Marcus Aurelius's, you know, ruminations on a Mysterium Xerxes, which is that's Elder Scrolls Oblivion reference, but it's normal people. You know, there's graffiti in Pompeii and like drawings of dicks on walls, you know, and it's like, or in World War II, there's dudes using a bazooka and pretending it's a penis too. That's insane. Like it's, you know, especially to a younger kid during these times when I talk about being impressionable, you know, developing my taste in video games and life, to be sitting there like chatting on fucking MapleStory and making fun of dicks. And then now you're like, oh, okay, like 100 years ago, after these kids, you know, couldn't work anymore at the age of 13 because they got all their fingers chopped off, they were still laughing about inappropriate toilet humor because they were 13-year-old boys. And that just seems so makes the world feel so much closer to me. You know, I feel so much closer to everyone across the world, not only now but forever. Every archaeological, anthropological artifact or site has real, true histories of people that were just like us. And to tie back to the video games, it's like you're trying to make this fictional world alive. And like, yeah, you know, in Mass Effect, for example, there's science fictional technology that doesn't exist, and there's aliens, and there's alien lesbians, and then there's blue aliens that are never dudes, they're always hot chicks. Even if they have babies with other aliens, their babies still come out as hot blue chicks. And that's not the most humanizing, provocative sort of emotional tangent that you can take as far as Mass Effect takes go. But you see them trying to ground it in reality. There's a point in time where once humanity starts interacting with the other alien civilizations, the first thing that they do is go to war. You know, and that's probably happened a million billion times throughout our history, particularly like prehistory. That's like all of what prehistory is. It's probably just like dudes with spears just going around killing each other. But because you build up that world and that setting, then you can become that character. You know, whether it's something like in The Witcher, you're playing a specific character named Geralt of Rivia, or in like a Dragon Age, you're creating your own. You're given a role, as in a role-playing game, etc. Or even in Call of Duty, like you're given a role, like you are this guy. You know, even if it's like your created character. Even in a game like Second Life or The Sims, it's like, yeah, you're sort of, you can just make yourself or whatever. But even in that, it's like, okay, here's my Second Life person, that's me. But it's like, but I'm a baker in this Second Life world, and the rules are very similar to the real world, but not. You know, there's other things going on. And then once you're in that position, then you start having the agency with the world. And that's where I wanted to bring in the interactive media discussion to the nature of fiction and interactive media. And that is the thing that movies and music and books, whatever, can never do is you can never change it. I mean, there's choose your own adventure books, but in a game, you're in real time, you're inhabiting this character and you're interacting with other characters that are really there. And the other characters are part of, you know, in the Elder Scrolls, this character is part of the Blades, which is like a secret service type of organization, but then they used to kill dragons. Now dragons are back, so they kill them again. And it's like, that's informing your interaction with something that's all ones and zeros, even though it's not always that deep. You know, it's sometimes that's as far as it goes, but it's still there, you know, and sometimes it is a lot more deep, you know, like there's another character in Skyrim that or well, let's go back to Mass Effect. There's a character in Mass Effect 2 named Jack, and she was part of a program where as children they were experimented on, because in that world they have psychic abilities. They call them biotic abilities, but it's you know, moving things with your mind. And that's something that didn't happen until humanity started interacting with alien races and all this science fictional technology, blah, blah, blah. And normally in that universe, it's sort of like you're 18 and you have to enlist into a specific role to be trained to do those things. But there was, because it's space and it's so big and vast, it's hard to keep everything regulated in the same way that it is hard to keep everything regulated in our own world. And so you have an instance of this sort of derelict doctor that I don't remember exactly if he was paid to do it or if he just wanted to do it. There's a couple of instances of crazy doctors in Mass Effect, actually. It's a solid fictional sort of trope. But he's experimenting on all these children and he's making them do shit with their mind that they don't want to, like, not like that, but like, you know, he's forcing them to like practice 14 hours a day or whatever. He's forcing them to fight each other, all these different things. You know, they can't leave. They don't know where their parents were. I don't know if they were stolen at birth, but it's kind of like the Jedi Order. But I'm getting close to my time here, so I want to wrap that up by saying that with that character, Jack, she's grown now and she has a lot of rage about that. You know, she was abused as a girl and it was out of her control, and now as an adult, she's a mercenary and a killer and a very violent person because she doesn't give a fuck about her safety, other people's safety. You know, she's like, you wanted me to be like this, and I'm like that, you know. And now you have an opportunity as the player to interact with this character and sort of like use her in that way, or just let her be, or encourage it. You know, you might need that, or talk to her, and like you can eventually like fall in love with her and say like, you know, you don't always have to be this way. And eventually in the third game, she can become like a bit of like a headmaster at the actual like Naval Academy psychic branch or whatever. And so to really put a pin on this whole conversation, the nature of fiction and interactive media is something that we can never truly do in real life, which is you can go back in time in a video game. You know, you can go and interact with the game as it was when it came out, you know, and you can be in that world and have those experiences that are real experiences. They're different, they're digital, they're not always as deep, or there's some weird, like, parts of it are as deep, but parts of it aren't. It's its own thing. There's a specific nature to it that is not the real world, but it is still real in and of itself. And that's what inspires me to go and read about these worlds and experience these worlds and be part of it, you know. And just to add a bit of a postscript that's relevant is that point again of you can go back there, you know. In history, you can imagine it and you can depict it and you can make a movie about it and you can try to recreate it as accurately as you can, and you can be part of a World War II reenactment and shoot blanks out of a Tommy gun or whatever, and like that's super cool and gets you into it. But like with a game like Skyrim that came out in 2011, or Assassin's Creed 2, or Grand Theft Auto 4, you can go back to the same place that you were when you were a kid, and you can go there and you can do the same things and see the same people, and unlike everything else in your life, nothing's changed. You know, you can watch Star Wars again and it will always be the same, and you will have changed, and the message of those worlds goes beyond time and age, and it's something that I wish more people could find in fiction, because I find that fiction can sometimes be more human than the real world.